guys, hope you're well. This is obviously going to be the video lesson that hopefully you'll be doing during the 2 hours that you're supposed to be in my lesson. Just a reminder that for the foreseeable future, until I say otherwise, we will be doing these video lessons. And the real purpose behind that, just to reiterate, is that I'd much rather you still hear from me even if I can't physically be in the room for that amount of time. I'd much rather go through quite a lot of the analysis with you as well. I just wanted to start by recapping what you would have done on your own last lesson, and I'm going to very quickly just check. Yeah, okay, good, it's still recording. The only reason I'm checking that is the last video I recorded for the other class didn't actually pick up any of my voice, which was fantastic, and I only found out afterwards. So, good. I wanted to start off by, first of all, looking at this table here, because we actually didn't get to cover that due to the fire drill, or the fire alarm that went off at the end of the last half term. The whole point here was talking about Mussolini's role in giving the fascist power in Italy, and how influential was he in basically allowing that power to be gained. Now, the main points here that I wanted to pick out on, there's a couple that I think really stand out. First of all, if you haven't completed this table, I recommend going back, reading through the information on page 50 and getting that information into the table there, because what could happen here, and particularly going into your VEMA, is there could be a question in your real exam that starts to ask you about, well, you know, who is responsible for this rise in power of the fascist movement? Is it the Squadrissimo? Is it Mussolini? Is it the faults of all the other parties, e.g. the Socialist Party, the PPI, and also the faults of the Liberal government? So I would recommend going through this table. The one thing that I wanted to talk about first of all, though, was this point here. Concerns amongst the fascist party that Mussolini was not radical enough. So I've spoken quite a lot about the centre, and in fact I'm going to draw a little political spectrum here that helps us outline this. I've talked quite a lot about the centre of the political spectrum. Now, if the centre are scared of one thing, it is the idea of socialism. And the reason they're so terrified of socialism is because if socialists gain enough power, if it turns into communism, which it very easily can do given the Russian Revolution is just a few years prior, it's this group of people that are going to find that their money is perhaps redistributed, taken away from them, that their land and property is then given to the working classes. Now, on the other side of that spectrum, you've obviously got fascism. And again, we've been through this quite a lot. And the idea of fascism is a lot more appealing to this group of people, not because they are particularly strong fascists, not because they are particularly, you know, big fans of Mussolini, but because it is seemingly doing something about the socialist movement. So the Squadrissimo are quite clearly doing something about the socialists. They're putting them down. They're, you know all the stuff about the castor oil, using the fish as a weapon, etc., etc. So this group of people are gravitating towards fascism and the right wing, but not because of what the right wing offer particularly, but more because of what they oppose in terms of socialism. Now, Mussolini's got to be very careful, because we know that fascism is built on the violence of the squads. Without the violence of the squads, perhaps it doesn't have its reach. But Mussolini doesn't just want this to be a fringe movement, he wants this to be the movement of the government. So he has to be very careful, because if these squads become too influential, too powerful, this group here that have just gravitated towards the fascist movement, they will start to become alienated. And what you'll start to see is that this gravitation towards the fascist movement will start to disappear. And instead, they will start to revert back to the parties that they were more familiar with, like the Liberals, like the PPI. So Mussolini has a decision to make here. Well, he makes a decision. He knows he needs to reduce violence. So he, and I'm just going to go back up to the reading here, he decides to put forward this idea of a pact of pacification. Now, the pact of pacification is an agreement with the socialists that basically says we will not provide any violent methods to oppose you. We want to pacify things. We want to make sure that we are not using violence as regularly as we were before. Now, obviously, the group of people that are going to be particularly unhappy about this, the Russ, they start to wonder, well, is Mussolini really the guy to take us forward? I mean, we've done all this work using this violence to gain support, and now he wants to undo all of that. So Mussolini is in a real position here where he could lose the confidence of the Squadrissimo and the Squadristi. So what does Mussolini do? Well, he says, well, do you know what? I'm going to walk away. If you do not support this pact of pacification, I will walk away and the fascist movement will no longer be something that I'm associated with. Now, this is a massive, massive risk, because if he walks away, that's it. His political credence, particularly with the PNF, is gone. And that violence will then, increase under the RAS, and it will just become as disorganized as it was. So as Mussolini walks away, the RAS and the Squadrismo very quickly realise that actually they need Mussolini. They need Mussolini because without him, that position on the political stage isn't going to be there. Mussolini is responsible for that ideology spreading. So they essentially, it's a case of asking for him back, and they agreed to the Pact of Pacification. Now, if I go back down, those concerns then that Mussolini is not radical enough, they're alleviated straight away, because the RAS and Squadrismo have seen what it can be like without Mussolini, and they don't want that option. So even if they don't necessarily agree with him, they have no choice but to listen to him and but to follow him. And it is, again, it shows how Mussolini takes advantage of this, because this is his political skill being shown. This is him exposing how actually he is very good at manipulating the situation to support him. And I call this a power play, because that's essentially what it is. Fine, if you won't agree with my policy, I'll walk away. And they ask for him back because they know that they need him. He is now the unrivaled leader of not just the PNF, but of the squads as well, and the RAS will now start to become organised under his reign. So that was one, because it was one of the points that could have been but missed maybe. I just wanted to make sure we were aware of what that meant. And then of course the other factors, just make sure that you're using the reading. Using the reading to complete this table as well. So the lesson that I left you with, and page 52, once again, this is vital, particularly going into VMA 2. If you are not completing page 52, which essentially asks, why did the PNF and Mussolini gain power, with all these different factors, then you are really missing a trick here. This is one of the most, probably thus far, the most important lesson we've done based on Mussolini and his power. Now, the lesson that I asked you to work on was this one here: how did Mussolini consolidate his power, 22-24? And I feel pretty confident that I explained it relatively well, and I explained exactly what you needed to do. Just a couple of points that I wanted to talk about, just so that you know what I wanted to get from this. So we already spoke about the maiden speech. I don't think we need to build on that too much. We spoke about the Catholic Church together as well. That's the example that I gave you. The Fascist Grand Council, I think, will start to make sense. So now we have a chosen 22 members of the Fascist Council. Now that deals with the problem of the cabinet, because it means that actually the cabinet doesn't have the leading role it once did, and we don't have those opposition powers in place. But it also means that his power increases within the party, because those 22 members are hand-picked by Mussolini. And to be hand-picked by Mussolini is a great show of confidence from him, and it's going to gain their support, particularly from those 22 members. The creation of the Milizia Volontaria per la Scurzia, that was the MSVN, and they are the group that now start to exert their influence over the Squadristi. And I think what's important to recognise about this is that this is all about managing and putting the Squadristi, in line with what Mussolini wants. So their role is now formalised. They are a paramilitary force. They support, so they're no longer their own independent group. They support the army and the police. The members pledge their allegiance to Italy and Mussolini. And later on, you can see here that Mussolini placed former army officers in control of local units and replaces the 200 RAS. Now, this is significant because it means that now those people that could oppose him within the party are unable to do so. This is a slightly different way to how Hitler deals with his SA members that he doesn't want any longer. Hitler just kills them. Mussolini doesn't yet have that power or dominance, and to be honest, he never does. So this introduction of the MSVN is crucial to get those people on side, or to remove them from the party as well. The policy of normalisation, he dilutes the PNF. So again, like we said, he's worried about violence, and the policy of normalisation is a way to reduce that level of violence. He does it by introducing 483,000 new members to the party. And the way you've got to imagine it is, so I've drawn it here, but I'm going to redraw it again because I think it'll make more sense as I draw it. You've got to imagine, let's say that you've got a group. So this is when, before the policy of normalisation, let's say there was a squadristy, and this is of course exaggeration, or an underestimation, I should say. Let's say you've got 4 members of a unit, and 3 of those 4 are violent members of that unit, and they want to be as extreme as possible. You have basically got 75% of people that are ready to resort to violence. Now, after that, there's a policy of normalisation, and actually, it's no longer 4 people in this group. Actually, Mussolini has increased this, and there are now 10 members of this group. It's a terrible 0. 10 members of this group. I'm just going to leave it as it is. And actually, the only 3 that are violent are the same 3 that are already there. Well, we've gone from 75% of the group being prepared to show violence to now 70% of the group being a more normalised, moderate part of the PNF. So this is all about reducing the violence. Now, not only does this deal with the party, again, because it reduces the influence of the RAS, but it also is a compromise with other political parties. Those that are concerned about the violent movement are now placated. They feel as though, because that violence has been dealt with, don't get me wrong, violence still exists and it still is a calling card of the fascist movement, but no longer are politicians perhaps fearing for their life, no longer are socialists fearing that they can't be a socialist, or perhaps fearing that they're going to get targeted by this group of people that are unaccounted for. The Acerbo law, this is quite a lot of reading, so very, very quickly. Basically, if you get 25% of the vote, you get 66% of the seats. That's how Mussolini deals with his problem of only ever having 7%. Now, this law actually becomes irrelevant because eventually they actually gain 66% anyway. So they have got a majority in Parliament now. But the Acerbo law is a nice, thing to fall back on for the fascists. But it does question how much democracy really is there. As you would have seen from your reading, and I'm going to get onto that in a second, this is actually largely supported. People are okay with this, and the reason they're okay with it is because we've had so many prime ministers in the last 10 years that a bit of stability and a majority that isn't based on a coalition is actually quite an attractive prospect to Parliament, even if it is a group of people that they're not necessarily agreeing with. So that's when we got on to what essentially is our murder mystery, the Matteoti crisis. And I'm not going to summarise too much here, but because you should have read this, and if you haven't, stop watching this video now, go and read it, because this is crucial to the rest of the lesson. But what starts to happen is that as the fascists start to take power, the use of violence is significant, despite the policy of normalisation. And a man named Matteoti is particularly unhappy about, number one, how the fascists have conducted themselves during the election, but also elements of corruption. So I'm going to go, if this wants to scroll down for me, which it clearly doesn't. Great. Come on. There we go. Nope, it still doesn't want to work for me. Right, I'll talk you through it and then hopefully I can fix this in a moment. Essentially, Matteoti exposes that Mussolini and the Fascist Party are selling war goods, so weapons that were used during the First World War, and they're selling them for a high profit. And so instead of that money being put back into the system, and instead of that money being put back into Italy, that money is going into the back pockets of the fascists. And particularly one person that benefits from this massively is Mussolini's brother, who we're going to talk about in a moment as well. Right, there we go, that should work now. Sorry, bear with me. So that was the first bit of corruption that was... right, it still doesn't want to work. Right, I'll figure it out in a second. That was the first bit of corruption that was seen or exposed by Matteoti. But the fascists were particularly worried, and they were worried because they believed that Matteoti was compiling a document that had all of the corruption that Mussolini and his party were showing. So the one thing in particular they were worried about was the selling of oil to American investors. So hold on. So I'm just trying to fix this thing here. It doesn't seem to want to work for me, so we might be a little bit stuck in terms of scrolling down, which is not ideal. Fantastic. Right, bear bear me for 1 second here. I'm just going to pause, guys, and then I'll hopefully would have fixed the issue. Sorry about that, guys. I think I've worked out a way to sort out this issue now. So if we go back here, yeah, so what they're really worried about, and here we go, this will be the proof in the pudding of whether this works or not. There we go, just about. Jesus. Wow, okay. So what they're really worried about are these allegations here. And these allegations are all about the bribes that have been paid by fascists, or to fascists by an American firm, Sinclair Oil, and this basically means that they have exclusive rights to the petroleum distribution in Italy. So that means that firms within Italy, big business, are going to suffer, and that might reduce the support that Mussolini gets from the industrial elite. So Mussolini is panicking about this, and this is a massive problem because, don't get me wrong, the fascists have started to consolidate their power, but they are by no means in complete control. So Mussolini panics, and then almost like clockwork, as Mussolini is panicking and Matteoti is prepared to present this dossier to the Italian population, a group of 5 men kidnap, or called the Checker, kidnap Matteoti as he is walking towards Parliament, push him in a car, and he is basically stabbed to death. Now, that might seem like a pretty cut and dry scenario to you. Well, you know, Mussolini's worried. These 5 fascists take Matteoti, they murder him, and 2 months later his body is found. Of course, this is because of the dossier that Matteoti had. Well, that's not quite the debate here. The debate is instead, number 1, how much was the intention to actually kill Matteoti? So was that always what the intention was? Second of all, did Mussolini actually have any idea that this was going on? Did Mussolini know that this was taking place? Now, if you look at the people that are performing these or benefiting from this, so Aldo Finzi, who is Mussolini's brother, the former editor of the newspaper that the car gets tracked back to, Cesare Rossi, who takes over, again, a very close confidant of Mussolini, you'd assume that it'd be incredibly difficult for this to take place without Mussolini knowing. And Mussolini stands by this and says, actually, there was no fascist plot to remove Matteoti. He stands by this and says, do you know what? If there was, if there is anything that I can take blame for, yeah, I can take blame for perhaps the fact that violence was used, but violence was used to secure the revolution. But in this instance, I will not take responsibility for Matteoti's death. So what was a cut and dry scenario now seems, well, okay, maybe there's some questioning that needs to take place. And actually, some theories that come out of this, some assume that maybe the socialists planned it themselves. Despite Matteoti being a socialist, they saw this as maybe it was a conspiracy. So what happens in the aftermath? Well, the socialists and the opposition parties abstain from parliament, they go on strike, but that kind of provides Mussolini with a platform to do what he wants to do. He's able to gain majorities in parliament because there's no opposition parties there, and the fascists and the nationalists that stay in parliament kind of say, you know, their argument is, we don't really care who did this, we just want a stable government. So that leads us on quite nicely, and again, I'm excited to see your artistic renditions of this story. I'm sure they'll be a lot more effective than my explanation there. So we've got to ask here, well, blunder plot or Machiavellian masterstroke, the murder of Giacomo Matteoti, was this because of Mussolini's orders? Was this even supposed to be a murder? Was this a rogue group of fascists? Was this actually a plot completely devised by the socialists? They're the kind of things we need to explore in this lesson. Now, this is quite a big one, so I'm going to ask you to spend the entire 2 hours on this. Let's start, well, in fact, I think we can move over the valid criteria here. I think we know what the most likely reasons for the murders are. Number 1, maybe Mussolini's power being removed. Number 2, he is a leader of an opposition party. He's also very respected in that role as well. Perhaps the corruptness, the loss of the elite support. But also, Mussolini has just got into power. We know how flexible these governments are. Can he really afford to give the people a chance to oppose him? Probably not. So let's look through on our first activity here then. So this is just a brief overview, a kind of, summary, pretty much like I've just given here, of the Matteoti crisis itself. Now, one thing that would be worth noting here is this point that's at the very top. Yes, okay, it's all very good and well to say that Mussolini has power, but the PSI, PCI and PSI still hold 80 seats between them. Now that is enough to challenge them on particular issues, particularly if nationalists are not on side with Mussolini's policy making. Now all I want you to do here is I just want you to read through the moment within this narrative, and you're just going to summarize those moments in a few words. So for example, if I was to I'm going to go back to my pen here. In fact, no, let's look at the highlight for now. So when the new parliament reopened in the 30th of May 1924, Matteoti delivered a strong speech denouncing the violence and corruption that had taken place during the election campaign. Matteoti accused Mussolini of being determined to establish a dictatorship no matter what the electoral results were. And actually, amazingly, Mussolini responds to this and says, yeah, that is exactly what will happen, which is actually met by loud applause in Parliament. Although worried about the speech, Mussolini was more concerned by the fact that Matteoti had purportedly amassed a large file on fascist party corruption and was about to make it public. Now, all I need you to do with that information is, in as few words as possible, a short sentence, 3 to 5 words, what is this telling us? Well, this is telling us that that Matteoti prepared to expose fascist corruption. If you thought my handwriting was bad with a pen, then I don't know if you're ever going to read anything that I write on this. But that's what I've said there. Matteoti prepared to expose fascist corruption. Now, your job, really straightforward. I want you to just recount the events of the Matteoti crisis, and just in as few words as possible, summarise each and every one of those. Once you've done that, so I would recommend you pause the video now. Once you've done that, we'll start to look at the debate itself, and then we'll start to look at what your next activity is. Okay, so pause this now. In about 10 minutes, come back, and then we'll look through the rest. Okay, so hopefully now you've completed that, and you've just consolidated some of the key points of the Matteoti crisis itself. Now, the next task, I'm kind of going to leave this majority up to you, because I've already spoken about this, and I've already spoken about some of the controversy that surrounds the debate over Mussolini's involvement. I want you to read through what the historians' theories are, what the debate is about this, and you're going to consider the following question. So, who is going to lose the most from this scenario? Who will gain the most? How certain could people be that it would actually help the fascist cause? I mean, here's a key thing for me, right? If you're going to say that the murder of Matteoti is going to help the fascist cause, I mean, it eventually does, and it eventually allows Mussolini to turn Italy into a dictatorship. But how would he know that? How on earth would he know that that would be the outcome? It's all, there's every chance that somebody else exposes this dossier. In fact, that's probably the right assumption to make. So maybe not so cut and dry that Mussolini was involved. Have a read through the debate itself. I would even recommend going away and maybe having, doing your own research, having a look at what other historians have said. I think we know that Duggan's, the article you read, I think he leans on the side of Mussolini, maybe knowing something about this. But have a read through, have a Google search, see what other historians are saying. Once you've done that, once you've made your decision on, how do you think about this debate, where do you stand maybe on this debate, come back, and we're going to then start to look at, well, how does this allow Mussolini to consolidate his power and establish that dictatorship? So again, give it a pause for about 10-15 minutes. Honestly, I really recommend having a look at this debate outside of the reading I've given you. Come back and decide, well, who do you think is responsible for this murder? And is there maybe a debate to be had about Mussolini's involvement? Okay, so as we move on then, so we've looked at what the Matteoti crisis is, we know the events, we know the debate surrounding it, and the debate of whether or not Mussolini was responsible for this. Now we need to look at how Mussolini uses this to basically consolidate all the power that he has, and this is going to be our final activity, and this should bring us up to basically the booklet being completed and us being able to look on to booklet 3. So let's have a look at the factor in consolidation of this power, and then we're going to analyse it. I'm only going to go through the first couple maybe with you, and then leave the rest up to you. I think it should be pretty self-explanatory. So, number one, Mussolini. And let's I'm just going to get my highlighter ready. Mussolini himself was unsure of how to act. Much of the press had been very critical of his leadership, especially during the Matteoti crisis. I mean, it's not really a great look if something like this is going on and your response is to basically hold your hands out and say, I don't know what to do about this. I'm not sure it's a particularly guilty response, but it doesn't show strong leadership. So, Matteoti, no, he's dead, rest in peace. Mussolini, he introduces a press censorship in July 1924, and he bans all meetings by opposition political groups. Now, this is largely a response to the negative press that he is getting. But remember, he has been able to enact emergency laws, so there's no one actually opposing Mussolini's policy here. These actions resulted in heavy criticism from leading liberals, including Orlando, Salandra, and Giolitti. Now, I think the analysis of this is pretty straightforward, and I think we can work this out quite easily. So, what does this actually say? What does this actually say about Mussolini and how he consolidates his power? Well, if you're censoring the press, you are basically not allowing any negative words to get out about you. It's influencing the masses, but also stopping your opponents from spreading their message as well. So I might just say here, by limiting the press, Mussolini, in fact I'm just going to put M for that, Mussolini is restricting opposing views and limiting the negative discourse surrounding his reign. And you know what, I've just had a panic that maybe this isn't recording, so I'm just going to quickly check. Yep, good, we're still recording. You can obviously include more. The reason I haven't included more is because of the format I'm writing on. But it's very clear, isn't it? By limiting the press, it means that actually you're going to have a limited opposition. You're going to have, and it's such a dictatorial move. It's something dictators do consistently. Limit the press, and you can basically say and do what you want without it being reported, if you so choose for it not to be reported. So here's the first step of him starting to establish that dictatorship. So remember, before we spoke about consolidating power, now we're talking about that process of going into a dictatorship. Let's look at one more together. So on the 3rd of January 1925, Mussolini made a key speech in Parliament where he announced the establishment of a fascist dictatorship. What a shock. I imagine the socialists had no idea. On the 12th of January, he announced a new cabinet taking on 4 offices himself, including Prime Minister and Foreign Minister. Now, that means that he is probably biting off more than he can chew here, but what it does mean as well is that he doesn't have competing voices in his immediate surroundings. Mussolini was confident that the king would not oppose him. The king has been pretty useless, to be honest with you. He has folded when he needed to stay strong, and he's given in, essentially. Nor the Chamber of Deputies, where he had a secure majority. By July 1925, the government was exclusively fascist. That means that fascism is the only part of the decision-making process. We've gone from proportional representation being introduced after the war to now one party leading the entire country. Mussolini was given the power to rule by decree because of... what have I done? Sorry. Mussolini is given the power to rule by decree because, of course, he is. It's fascists in Parliament that have allowed him to do that. In January 26 alone, he issued 2,000 decrees. So in 1 month, he is ordering 2,000 decrees. Now, that is an insane amount. And you can argue that it perhaps sounds like a leader that doesn't really know what they're doing. but it also shows that he is in complete control here. No one else is signing those decrees, just him. Mussolini launched a wave of arrests, and authoritarian laws were drafted by Alfred Rocco. Really key individual here. Make sure you are jotting that name down somewhere so that you remember who he is. The fascist Minister for Justice, which destroyed the constitution of the state. This is essentially the death of the liberal government now. We no longer have democracy in Italy. This is the end of the liberal regime and the introduction of the fascist regime. Now, don't get me wrong, we had our criticisms of the liberal regime, but I would much prefer a liberal regime that accounts for itself than a fascist dictatorship that will not account for itself. So this is a real dark day in Italian history. So I'm not going to write this one down, but let's think about what we've seen here. Well, first of all, he basically takes control of all the key areas of policy making within his own party. He gains that power. We can see that he has now a secure majority in Parliament, and actually by 25, the government is completely fascist. By 26, he issues 2,000 decrees, again highlighting that he is the key decision maker. At this point, he's basically unquestioned in the government. What he says goes. Not only that, but by using these launching these waves of arrests, he's actually showing as well that if you don't support me, if you don't agree with me, well, I'm more than prepared and more than happy to basically limit your rights as an Italian citizen. So, as you read through, you're going to come across quite a lot of individuals, quite a lot of names, and I want you to do exactly as I've just done there. Every single piece of evidence helps Mussolini gain his dictatorship. I want you to highlight the key evidence, but also then explain to me how does this help him establish a dictatorship. I would predict that this should take about 15 to 20 minutes. So I'm going to leave you to get on with that. If you're going to pause the video here, I'm not going to talk too much at the end of this, but I am just going to give you a little heads up about your VEMAs, etc. So have a pause here, complete this activity, and then we'll come back, we'll discuss, and I'll give you a bit of a heads up for your VEMA. So hopefully as you've read through that, you've seen how every step of the way Mussolini is continuing to grow his power. Now again, we see more evidence of the squadristi being diluted. We saw now the independence of those Rus finished. It is all under the reign of Mussolini. We see that all unions are now defunct except from the fascist union. So if you are a worker that wants to be a part of a union, you must join the fascist union itself. Again, it brings in those working class voters. Or well, not that he needs voters anymore. Mussolini gains the support of the army, the conservative elite. Obviously, we know why that's so important. The failed assassination attempts are, in a way, a blessing in disguise for Mussolini, because it means that actually he's able to reintroduce capital punishment, and it means that he is allowed to ban all other political parties, which again, it is out of the fascist textbook. We will ban everyone else so that you've got no choice but to follow us. And then, of course, we have the secret police, which I'm sure you've read through each of them now. So, we've reached the end of this booklet, and here's what I'm going to ask you to do, and you can see me scrolling through it, and I know you're all thinking, please don't let him be asking me to do this, but it is what I'm going to ask you to do, particularly with VEMA 2 coming up. So I've already mentioned that VEMA 2 will consist of 2 assessments. So VEMA 2 will be a full Italy paper. So that is section A and B, and you'll also do a section B for paper 1, which is of course Germany, and that is your comparison assessment. So my advice to you, and use these knowledge grids as well, because I think they help massively, but I would, and I'm going to set this as homework that I expect to see when we return. I want you to go through each of these questions, and this is a knowledge test, and this is how you become an A-star student. This is how you become somebody that knows everything you need to know by answering these questions. I want you to answer each of these questions, and I want you to get that done for me by the following Thursday. So not Thursday the 13th, but I want to see it by Thursday the 20th. So it kind of works out both ways here. I've only given you one lesson, but I am giving you this homework to complete. Now, Now, if it's not complete, then that will be a case of me knowing that you didn't watch this video all the way through, which kind of defeats the point of me saying that, because you're not hearing me say it anyway. But for those of you that are watching this and do know what you need to do, this is how you get that A-star knowledge. And if you take this understanding into the VEMA, you know, and there are questions on booklet 1 as well that I recommend going back and looking at. If you take this understanding into VEMA 2, then I think you'll be in a really good position to get the grade that you're capable of. Right, I am happy to leave it there, Year 12. I hope that that's been straightforward. I hope you've understood what I've asked you to do. If there are any questions, then please feel free to let me know. I will be at my laptop as you're doing this lesson, so feel free to email, feel free to let me know if there's anything that you need help with, and I'll get back to you as soon as I possibly can. Okay, thank you very much, guys, and I'll see you very soon. Bye.